The cheapest thing in your kitchen moved more human beings across an ocean than any war in history. Not gold, not oil, not land. A white powder you stir into a cup without even looking at it. And that is the least strange part. Between 1501 and 1866, roughly 12.5 million Africans were forced onto ships bound for the Americas, and most of them landed in places whose entire business was one crop, cane. Meanwhile, at the other end of that ocean, in a comfortable London parlor, sugar sat inside a locked wooden box, and the lady of the house wore the key on a chain at her waist. So here is the thing I could not stop thinking about. How does something nobody actually needs, a substance with no nutritional purpose whatsoever, end up moving more human beings across the world than any war? And how does that same thing end up costing you less than the paper bag it comes in? The answer is colder than I expected. Welcome back to TokiCast, my friend. If a story like this is your kind of thing, follow along. It means everything to us. Now let me take you to the beginning, which is not where you think it is. Sugar cane is a grass. People in New Guinea were chewing it around 8,000 years ago, sucking the juice and spitting out the fiber, and for thousands of years that was all it was, a sweet stick. It was in India that someone worked out how to boil that juice down until it dried into hard grains you could carry, store, and sell. The Sanskrit word for those grains was sharkara. Say it out loud. You can hear your own word for it hiding inside. Around 327 BCE, one of Alexander the Great's admirals sailed down the Indus and sent back a report about a reed that produced honey without any bees. Nobody in the Mediterranean knew what to do with that information for a very long time. Then, in 1099, the story arrives in Europe the way most things did, through a war. Starving crusaders camped in the fields of what is now Lebanon and Syria, found tall reeds growing around them, cut them, and chewed them raw to stay alive. They wrote it down. Back home, sugar became a drug. Not a food, a medicine. Persian and Arab refiners had learned to boil and cool it into hard white cones, and apothecaries in Venice and London kept those cones behind the counter, shaving powder off them with iron nippers and selling it by the ounce for coughs, for fevers, for grief. Records from 14th century London price it at around 2 shillings a pound. Read that again. Roughly a week and a half of a laborer's wages. For a spoonful. Why would anyone pay that? Because almost nobody could make it. And the Crusaders had brought home more than a taste. They had brought home the method. The method was simple, and it never really changed. One island, one crop, and people who are not paid. It was already running in Cyprus and Crete, where Venetian and Genoese landlords grew cane, using enslaved captives brought from around the Black Sea. Then, in 1419, Portuguese ships reached an island in the Atlantic with nobody living on it at all. They called it Madeira. The word simply means wood, and then they burned much of that wood off it to plant cane. Within a single lifetime, this empty rock was supplying much of Europe. Then came São Tomé, an island sitting almost on the equator, uninhabited, and positioned directly opposite the African ports where captives were being sold. By the 1550s, there were around 60 sugar mills on it, worked almost entirely by enslaved Africans. The machine was now complete. Island, cane, mill, and human beings treated as equipment. In 1493, on his second voyage, Christopher Columbus stopped in the Canary Islands and loaded cane cuttings onto his ships. This was not a whim. He had lived in Madeira. He had married into a family with sugar interests. He knew exactly what he was carrying. Sit with that for a second. The plantation was not invented in the Americas. It arrived there fully built, in the hold of a ship. It needed one more island to turn all of this into an industry. and the men who found it kept careful accounts. That island was Barbados, 166 square miles, smaller than most cities you know. In the 1640s, its planters gave up tobacco and switched to cane, and within 20 years, that single speck of land was worth more to England, in trade, than all its other American colonies put together. Here is what that switch actually meant. Cane must be crushed within a day or two of cutting, or the juice sours. So the mill cannot stop. During harvest, people worked in shifts through the night, 18 hours at a stretch, feeding cane between spinning rollers by hand in the dark. Accounts from the islands describe a hatchet kept hanging beside those rollers. It was not for the cane. It was there for when a sleeve and then an arm went in. Next door stood the boiling house, a row of copper kettles over open fire, each one hotter than the last, and workers ladling scalding syrup from one to the next by hand, while the heat sat at a level that a modern kitchen would never permit. The syrup was finally poured into clay cones and left to drain and harden. That is where the sugar loaf you would later see in a London parlor was actually born, in that room. A young physician named Hans Sloane arrived in Jamaica in 1687 and wrote down what he saw on those estates in careful, unbothered detail. He also brought home a recipe for mixing cocoa with milk, and his private collection would later become the founding contents of the British Museum. The pleasant things and the terrible things traveled in the same crates. The people inside those buildings did not quietly accept any of it. And in one place, they took the entire machine apart. Before that, though, understand what these islands were worth. By the middle of the 1700s, sugar land was the most valuable ground on earth, acre for acre. And in 1763, at the end of a world war, France was left with a choice that historians still argue about. It kept the islands. All of New France, an area larger than most of Europe, was handed over so that Paris could keep its cane. Voltaire had already sneered at Canada as a few acres of snow. The men negotiating agreed with him. Sit with that. A continent was traded away for sugar. And what was really being traded was not soil. It was around 500,000 people, and they had already started ending it themselves. Jamaica, Easter 1760. A man remembered as Tacky led an uprising that shook the island for months. Barbados, 1816, Busa. And Saint-Domingue, the richest colony on the planet, producing roughly 40% of the world's sugar with around 500,000 enslaved people, rose in August 1791. Their leaders, among them Duddy Boukman and later Toussaint Louverture, fought France, Spain, and Britain in turn. On the first day of 1804, they declared the Free Nation of Haiti, the only rebellion of enslaved people in history to found a country. In Britain, the answer to all this came from an unexpected place: kitchens. Parliament rejected abolition in 1791, so ordinary households simply stopped buying. A pamphlet by William Fox, arguing that every pound consumed was paid for in flesh, sold tens of thousands of copies within months. As many as 300,000 people gave up sugar altogether. Potters sold bowls stamped with the words, "East India sugar, not made by slaves." The trade was banned in 1807. Slavery itself was abolished across the British Empire in 1833, and Parliament paid £20 million in compensation. Not to the freed, to roughly 46,000 slave owners for their lost property. It was about 40% of the national budget, so the government borrowed it. British taxpayers finished repaying that loan in 2015. Meanwhile, in a cold field in Germany, something pale and completely unremarkable was growing in the ground. Here is the part almost nobody knows. In 1747, a Berlin chemist called Andreas Marggraf put slices of a common white root under a microscope and found crystals in it, Sugar, the identical molecule, growing in a beet, in a cold northern field, in a vegetable that farmers fed to cattle. Nobody cared. Extracting it cost more than it was worth. Then his student, Franz Karl Achard, spent 30 years refusing to let it go, and opened the world's first beet sugar factory in Silesia in 1801. And then history did him an enormous favor. Britain blockaded Napoleon's Europe and cut the Caribbean supply off completely. In 1811, Napoleon ordered tens of thousands of hectares planted with beet. Within 2 years, France had more than 300 small factories pulling sugar out of the ground beneath its own feet. Stop there. Sugar no longer needed an island. It no longer needed a fleet, a garrison, a hatchet by the rollers, or a single human being in chains. So that is the answer. It moved more human beings across the world than any war, because it could not be made without them. Cane was never really a crop. It was a factory, and that factory ran on bodies. And it costs you less than the paper bag it comes in, because a chemist found the same crystal inside a root that will grow almost anywhere cold and wet. Abundance is very good at hiding a crime inside something ordinary. We started with a locked box in a London parlor. We chewed a reed in a starving army camp, watched a plantation arrive in a ship's hold, stood in the heat of a boiling house, saw a continent signed away for 2 islands, and finished in a German field full of cattle feed. And the loaf that was once locked away is now the thing you tear open without reading and drop into a cup while thinking about something else. I don't think that's a reason to feel guilty about your coffee, but it is worth knowing that cheapness is never a fact. It is a story about who paid and when, and whether they had any choice. Most of the ordinary things around you are quiet at the end of a very loud history. You just have to be curious enough to ask, which part stayed with you? The key on the chain, the continent traded away for 2 small islands, or the debt that was finally paid off in 2015? Tell me below. Next time, a man fills a ship with something he cut for free out of a frozen lake and sails it toward the tropics, where every sailor aboard is certain it will be gone long before they arrive. The newspapers laugh at him openly. He goes bankrupt twice, and then he becomes rich selling a thing that disappears if you simply leave it alone. Take care of yourself, my friend. This has been TokiCast, where the small things quietly change the world. I'll see you soon.